Hey gang, welcome back to Dragonfire Designs. Now this week I had an opportunity to redo an older video that I had put on my channel when I first got started. A friend of mine asked me this week to make her a set of replica resin cast wearable mermaid shells. Now I'm going to be using these molds that I already have, these silicone molds, and I'm not going to go into detail on how to make silicone molds in this video, but rather show the process of using them to create these finished pieces. These are just resin cast pieces. So let's go ahead and take a look at that process. Now this is the mold release that I like to use. I get this from Silpack. It's, if I remember correctly, it's not that expensive, just a couple of bucks, but definitely worth investing in if you're going to be doing a lot of resin casting into silicone molds. Now here we have our mixing cups prepared, and they're both labeled A and B for the two parts. Now this resin is mixed in a 50-50 ratio. It can either be done by weight or just by eyeballing it. Now we will be doing very small pours because what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be mixing the resin, pouring it in, and then just sloshing it around because we're going to create a nice hollow shell coating inside, ironically, a shell. So let's move on. Now we've got A and B. We're going to go ahead and pour those into our mixing cup. Now you want to work fairly quickly at this stage because the resin is going to begin to cure. You want to mix thoroughly. Get both parts A and B well mixed. I'm not going to take too long on that because again it's going to start curing. So now I can go ahead and pour into my mold. I want to make sure I get all of that in there. I am running short on resin right now, so I need to make sure I do not waste a single drop. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to very carefully begin to slosh this around. I'm going to try to coat as much of the surface as possible while it's still in a very liquid state. And I just let it go right up to the edge. And this takes a little practice to be able to finesse this. And it's going to start thickening up. And I'll do this several times until I've got a nice even coat along the inside of the mold. Now I'm going to go ahead and stop the camera right now so that I can focus on getting this evenly sloshed. Now take a look. This is just the first coat. As you can see, it's starting to cure. Now while it's still tacky, you can see just still leaves a little bit of a fingerprint in there. That's when I want to go ahead and mix up another batch and pour it in. Now it's important to make sure that you do it while it's still in this state. If you leave this sit, say overnight, and try to go and pour another batch, yeah, the resin will stick, but then you run the risk of layers separating. So when you're doing a slush cast like this, it's best to go ahead and do it. Pour up your different batches within minutes and get it in there while it's still fresh. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, basically repeating what you've already seen, pouring equal parts A and B, mixing, sloshing, and letting it cure. So now, after 3 quick pours, you can see that I've got a nice even coat all the way around. We're going to set this aside and let it finish curing, and I'm going to go ahead and do the other side. And when I've got both of them poured, we'll go ahead and demold them and show you how the finished raw resin casts look. So now we have our resin cured in the mold, and these are how they come out. As you can see, I'm going to have to clean up the edges. The next step will be to wash them to remove any remaining residue from the mold release, and then prep them to be primered, and we'll move on to the paint stage. So at this point I've gone ahead and primered the surface with some flat enamel white. The next step, we're going to go ahead and put the base coat, which is going to be a pearl finish. This adds a little bit of depth and dimension and helps the metallic purples, which will be airbrushed on, to sort of pop and come off the surface just a little bit better and a little bit brighter. Now I go ahead and just apply this with a straight brush, and we're going to go ahead and coat the entire surface. And this usually takes 1 to 2 coats before you'll start seeing the pearl show up. Now I'm going to go ahead and do that, and we'll come right back and take a look at it. Now before I move on to the next step, which will be painting the other shell, I wanted to give you a chance to see side by side the difference that the pearl adds. It's subtle, but it makes a big difference of having that as a base. Now I'm going to go ahead and paint up the other base coat on here, and then we'll move on to the airbrushing. Now to airbrush the purple, I use this pearl violet paint. I'm going to go ahead and thin that down and load up the airbrush, and we'll move on to the airbrushing stage. Now that we've got our purple color airbrushed on, it's time to move on to crystal clear enamel. Now I'm going to do several light coats building this up, and this is going to protect our paint, and it's also going to add a little bit of a nice gloss sheen and really give some depth. Again, I do this in several light passes. If you go too heavy, it's very easy to start developing runs, and we don't want to mess the finish up at this stage. Now we've got our gloss coat on. I'm just going to bring this a little closer to the camera to let you see. There's that nice glossy sheen. All that remains is to add a little rhinestone gems. So I'm going to go do that, and we'll be right back and take a look at the finished mermaid shells. Now, after making sure that my paint has dried and fully cured over 24 hours, I've gone ahead and applied the rhinestone gems. And you can see we have our finished replica mermaid shells ready to be boxed up and sent out to their new owner.